So, all right, so it's 8:34. We're going to try and get started. I know that a few more folks will probably join us. But first, is there anybody from the public who has a comment to share? Is there anyone from the public? Does not appear so. So we'll jump right into attendance. Please bear with me, everyone. I'm still not feeling great. Ram.
Here.
Bob.
Here.
Lindsay.
Here.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Patrick.
I'm here.
Ajit. Lauren.
Here.
Jan.
Here.
Rachel. Trina. Susan.
Present.
Jen. Maura.
Here.
And I see Lori is here. Am I missing anybody? Okay, great. Scott, do you want to share the slides?
Yeah.
So the first item on the agenda is the learning agenda. So I shared the latest draft with everybody last night. The changes reflect the feedback that we got both from this group and the executive board. Did anybody have a chance to look at it? And are there any comments or edits that folks have? If not, I'll let Scott. Oh, Jan.
You can always count on me for questions sometime. Can you help explain the difference between this and the research agenda? I'm not understanding the distinction. Thanks.
Of course, I was gonna actually ask Scott to do that. So.
All right, well then that's fine. You can just roll with it.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna turn it to Scott to sort of sum up what we've been doing with this transition.
I think so. I think there's two. It's not a huge difference, I guess, is the short version. It's mostly kind of just branding. I think there's two reasons that or two reasons for changing the naming of it. As you can see, like the topics and the wording are pretty much the same. Like there's just not a big difference. One reason for changing it is to be clear that the work and the topics that are undertaken, the work that's undertaken through these topics is not strictly research. And I think sometimes people could interpret if it's a research agenda that it means it's research and then it's contributing to a generalizable body of knowledge and sort of like that strict definition. Whereas I think like historically, P20 has done, audit, evaluation, sort of indicators, reporting, dashboarding, things that are outside of like the sort of strict definition of research. So we wanted to be clear that this is, a system and an effort that is not only, for research in the kind of vein of like academic research. I think the other reason was to try and have something that the executive board can engage with, and the executive board are not sort of generally by nature researchers, and so we wanted something where they weren't thinking like, oh, research is someone else's job, it's not my job, and that they're thinking like, okay, what do I need, as agency leaders to, fulfill the work that our agency is doing. But, like you can see in the wording and the track changes in the document, it's just not a huge difference in practice. It's just more for kind of framing and branding it. I don't know, Jan, if that answers your question.
It does, and that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Sure.
So in addition to these 5 topics, one of the things we're hoping to do in the coming year is engage further with you and your agencies to expand on this agenda to make sure that we are including questions that are pertinent and important to your agencies, and that we want to make sure are prioritized with data requests.
I'm
Scott,
going to go
did
back
you have
to the
anything
last
to add?
slide too. Yeah, just the little flow chart here I think is useful. So like we're on, I think we're kind of wrapping step 3 here. So we did the stakeholder engagement through the board meetings, I think identified priority questions. Again, there's not huge changes from what had been there. And then this step is like writing the agenda, putting it into prose. And then the next thing, and this is probably what we'll have at a, I don't know whether in January or in a future data governing board meeting, is starting to undertake the activities and converting like these topics into actual data requests, which in some cases they already are, but trying to move forward and kind of act on the topics in the agenda. So like this little flow chart I think is kind of handy. And, you know, we're just working through the steps of it. So we went through the questions, now we have it in writing, you know, subject to any changes we get either through this meeting or, you know, the next couple of days. Then we'll go and update the website. And then, you know, in a future meeting, we'll go through some of the nuts and bolts of converting these into requests. Should I move on?
Yeah, I think so. Are there any other comments, questions, thoughts? If not, we'll move on to the technical upgrades. So we have been working on the incident response plan. I know that we are working on getting a draft ready to share with this group after the meeting, but I believe Bob has some slides, or well, we have the slides, but I don't know if I'm putting Bob on the spot here. But I know that we had some updates that we wanted to share with the group that will be included in the draft that we share with everyone after the meeting.
I think
Sure.
Bob and I are sharing these. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah. Go
Yep.
ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to take myself off mute. You want me to just kind of go over this first part and then you can go over the examples, Scott?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So here's the new and revised flow chart, and thanks to Scott for printing it up because the version I put together wasn't very pretty. So any incident that happens, and those are defined in the document themselves, there's going to be, well, yeah, I'm not going to get too detailed yet, right? We'll ask questions, I guess. Notifying to the OPM, and then they'll help determine whose data is involved. And if it's a BITS supported agency, then it will go down the left-hand side. And non-BITS goes down the right-hand side. So BITS is what I'm most familiar with. You know, basically each agency should have their own response for their own data. Now, that response could be, okay, we're going to call the BITS help desk and get security involved, you know, and move forward. And I have been talking to security, and they do have a pretty comprehensive plan on what they do, you know, when they do occur in a security incident. And they do put out general information, you know, status updates that go through, and work with the data owning agency, you know, to do what's necessary, whether it be close down IP addresses or revoke authorities, or, you know, whatever that may be. But, you know, as we kind of go down here, so the agency determined the agency response. It could be something as simple as someone had their laptop stolen. So you probably don't need to pull in all security and stuff like that. The laptops are encrypted and stuff like that. So it's just making sure that you know, it's been reported and it's tracked down. But there could be other things like a virus that kind of like the one that has been going through throughout the country now, and security is running with that one, and they're doing coordinating all the patching for all the servers at the state. And then the non-bits side, I think we probably need a little more information from each of those areas that on how they handle it. In all cases, bit security could assist if need be. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions. Oh, sorry, Jan.
Yeah, like I said, you can always count on me for a question.
That's perfect.
This is great. I love the flow chart. It's really helpful. What do we do? Like, I think the plan should also include, like, what happens when, like, how do we coordinate an effort that spans multiple agencies? I mean, it's easier, I think, on the bit side for those, but when you then have something that, let's say, for example, Yale has a research project going on, right? They've got data from 4 different agencies, including bits and non-bits, and they've so they've been hit with a ransomware attack. How is it? I think we have to build in a coordination point. Like, how do we coordinate the work across the agencies? Is like, whose role would that be? And then I don't have an answer for that, but I'm just trying to think about scenarios, or maybe it's a data request, or Yale's resources are probably pretty sound. So like maybe, yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, have you been seeing the P4 the stuff that's going around now, the virus that's going around now? Have you seen any communications there on that?
No.
Okay, so that answers my question.
But I don't know that I'd be the one to get that. I mean, our security office might have.
Oh, okay. So it's like I said, the bit security group has a pretty comprehensive plan to go out, which includes a communications, and they do send it out. As a matter of fact, I think there was one that went to the general public. When I say general public, the state employees, but I've gotten so many emails lately, I can't find it right off. But so I guess communications is probably the most difficult thing, because no matter how many people you communicate to, there's going to be somebody left off. I'll have to do that as a takeaway, Jan, to check with our security operations to see, their what their process is, how they identify those, and how they coordinate, and that might give us a pathway to figure out, to answer your question.
Sure, thank you. And maybe it's about, the next step at some point we'll have to know, like with the notification, there will probably need to be a list somewhere of who's to be notified, with name, contact number, whatever. And maybe that would help solve it in terms of the communication.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Good question.
I don't know if there's other questions. We had 3 scenarios kind of mapped out to just go through, like, the 3 practical examples of this. I think Janice maybe helps a little with the questions. I just can't see if there's other questions, but I'll start clicking through these.
Yeah, I don't see anything. I don't see any hands raised. So.
But I'll walk through these, and I think, to your question, Jan, too, I think we're going to rely a lot on the data governing board reps to serve as like intermediaries to the agencies, and then know the points of contact, so that, like, if you have, CSU, we know, like, has a CISO, and so if that person, turns over, they're out of the office for a week, it's tough for us to maintain that level of information centrally, but we'd rely on the data governing board reps to be the intermediary and say, like, oh, okay, now this is the person who we have to talk to this week. And so that's why that basically the step is the notification and then the outreach to the data governing board reps. And so we'll try and, I think, figure out ways that we can, I think we have a list of like points of contact in the back of the current draft that we'll send out after the meeting, just ways we can do that, as efficiently as possible. I don't want to create like an extra layer where it's not necessary. We walked through it, we put together like the flow chart for 3 examples, and then the full plan, there's 3 types of security incidents that are identified: inappropriate use, unauthorized access, and denial of service. And so we just tried to construct like a realistic but hypothetical example. These are not things that actually happened of each of these. And so inappropriate use is similar to what Bob described, where someone who's at a university, private college, requested data, they have sensitive data on their laptop, they lose the laptop gets stolen, and here we had 2 of the executive branch agencies. So it's like a pretty straightforward flow chart. The person loses the laptop, they don't know who the staff are at the agencies in question, but they know like that they're supposed to reach out to OPM because we've been the sort of point of contact in the request process for most aspects of it. They let us know we lost the laptop. We notify then the reps from those 2 agencies on the data governing board and say, hey, this happened. And then depending on the incident response plans for those agencies, either they undertake it through the agency, or I think, like Bob was saying, maybe they just go straight to the state IT help desk for it, depending, on the scope and the severity of it and the nature of that. And so some of the determination of the severity and other things we moved after the notification phase, because that's easier once we can make the handoff to the security staff at the actual agencies. But the main thing that I think is going to be our challenge is the clearinghouse of like whose data are involved in the incident, and then getting that information to those agencies kind of as quickly as possible. So this one is pretty straightforward. Like the notification comes into us, we notify the DGB reps, and then either within the agencies or by coordinating with bits, they mount the response. And then we can have the feedback loop back to this board, post-incident or after action review, and then determine, do we want to make changes kind of in practice with, that one requester, or in policy where, maybe we'd say, don't put data on the laptop or something in the future. Those are things that we could sort of decide as policy questions for the board. Second scenario, the unauthorized access. I don't know if these like fit exactly into these categories, but I tried to come up with something that's realistic and matches the 3 categories. So in this case, I think as everybody knows, we use Axway Secure Transport for the SFTP. That's the application. In this case, that sort of supports the application for the state agencies. Department of Labor administers it and is the user. But in this case, maybe BITS is the one, if there's a breach or some security flaw in that application itself, that might come into BITS first. And so in this case, like the IT would know about it possibly before some of the agencies. So in this case, that's where we're lucky that we have Bob, and he could say, hey, I know everyone is using Axway Secure Transport. We need to put out the all points bulletin that there's been a security incident related to the application that we're relying on. So he tells us, and then we, in this case with DOL as the user, they can pull the list of the agencies who have data in Axway Secure Transport at that point, and then we can go through the notification process. And this is where we sort of have the presumably there'd be several agencies at any point in time that have data in the SFTP, and so we might have to do the branching between the agencies that are supported through this and the ones that are not. And so we have a little box in the middle that is coordinate between the BITS and the non-BITS agencies. Exactly how this happens, I don't think we will know until we kind of run the water through the pipes, but that's where I think, and for the 4 non-BITS supported agencies, we'll probably have like a little bit of an ask on the points of or more detail or points of contact if you want to provide it. But we'll lean on the data governing board reps to help with that coordination. And so to say, oh, okay, we found, there's data from CCH in SFTP, we reach out to Lindsay, and is there, someone at CCH who works on security? Do you have an incident response plan? Or we could just coordinate with you directly, and then try and pull those individuals into the incident response team that occurs through the state IT supported agencies. So it's, I think, a little unclear how this will actually work until we try it, but that's the general idea. So in this case, same general flow, notification comes in, we figure out whose data are involved, and then go through that flow chart based on the response that those agencies have. And the last type of security incident, denial of service, which is apparently now happening all over the country due to the Log4j, or whatever the name of the virus is. We just talked to, some of us were on a call with one state yesterday or earlier in the week where one of the branches, 3 branches of government had a denial of service for the entire branch. I know other states are going through the same thing now. So this is a very realistic scenario that I think, fortunately, we are not in the throes of right now. But let's say that there was denial of service for one agency. In this case, DOL is the most sort of sensitive centrally for P20 Win operation, so that they have a ransomware attack, they let us know, and then we notify the data governing board members that all of the, for agencies who have data that is at DOL for matching purposes at that point in time. And same flow chart kind of after that based on the agencies, either it's, through your own individual agency response or with the BITS security help desk. This kind of thing, I think you can imagine the severity is higher. It would probably escalate quickly, and we would involve the BITS security team more quickly than like the researcher loses a laptop scenario. So those are the 3 sort of scenarios we worked through. I don't know if there's more questions or suggestions on these. What we're planning to do after this, we had one set of comments come in late yesterday, so I apologize for not getting the draft back to people, but several people, Jan, Patrick, Liam, Fred North from DCF, Linda from CCH, Maura, and Bob and myself worked on, reviewing this draft, and we will send the current version, which is relatively short and manageable to read, out to everybody after this meeting with any further comments or edits kind of based on the discussion here. And then hopefully we'll be able to finalize this plan, put it in place, and then once we have a plan, we're not done. We have to keep this up to date and go through sort of trainings and just keep this something that is fresh in people's minds so that when something bad happens, we're not caught flat-footed about it. We'll stop talking. I don't know if there's questions, comments on any of the flow charts here. These are, again, kind of high-level schematics. We'll have a little more detail in the plan itself. But just to give you a sense of like the sort of the likely or realistic scenarios that are kind of in scope for the incident response plan. Hearing nothing. Thank you, everybody, particularly Bob, for putting a lot of time into this, and the security team that's who have not been like on any of these phone calls that I know, have put some time into reviewing these documents and kind of giving us their advice, and who eventually will potentially be on the hook for responding to any of these. And so it's good that they're aware that this is the kind of thing that could be coming down the pike, and I appreciate the help that everyone in the small working group has put into this. Katie, I'm going to click to the next slide unless you tell me not to.
No, I was going to say we can move on to the next item. First, though, I think some folks joined us, so I just want to make sure that I capture them. So Ajit, Rachel, Trina, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Present.
Cool. All right. So, yeah, I'll let.
Oh, I was going to talk.
Scott
Sorry. Yeah.
I forgot about
this. This will be very
part.
quick. Then I'll stop talking for a while. We did. So folks remember we had a technical upgrade planning group in the first half of this year who went through sort of a holistic look at technical infrastructure, both people, process, and technology for P20 Win. And we produced a set of recommendations this summer. One of the recommendations was to kind of explore some more options, particularly around the data request management, the data transmittal, and then the sort of underlying infrastructure for the system as a whole. So we have explored those options through a series of phone calls that a very nice group of people have been willing and patient to go through. So we've had calls with several different peer state systems. The list is here from other sort of SLDS or integrated data systems around the country. We had a couple of vendor calls with vendors that had sort of reached out at something that sounded relevant to this. So we are almost through that. I think we have one more call scheduled, and at least my hope is that we will be able to synthesize takeaways from that series of phone calls in January, maybe February, depending on how realistic that plan is. We've been through a bunch of exploratory phone calls. They're very informative and interesting to like learn from what other states are doing. I would welcome, I don't know if anybody who's been in those, you know, Patrick, Jan, Maura, I think, I'm trying to remember who else has been on those that's on this phone call. But I don't know, everybody does things a little bit differently. And every phone call has had something where I think we've learned from. So I don't know if anybody has anything you've learned from that, but my hope is that we'll be able to kind of come up with a summary in January and or February, and then make some suggestions based on that.
Yeah, I would just, just observe that it's been very interesting. Certainly we have learned something from every call. Every state does do something differently, and just, from the perspective of my world, where part of my world is with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where everything is standardized and every state is following exactly the same procedure on exactly the same dates and producing exactly the same data. This is a lot. I don't want to say the Wild West, because that sounds like everybody's following rules with regard to confidentiality. There's some things that are consistent. Everybody's concerned about confidentiality, security, and privacy, as we should be. But how the actual system works it's very different from state to state, and that's been very eye-opening for me.
All right, clicking.
Okay, moving on. All right, so the next item is, so we wanted to briefly talk about the data request process, specifically the attachment spreadsheet. So part of what we're trying to do is to streamline and simplify the process so that more people can access the system and submit data requests. The attachment is a bit complicated, and so we were hoping to get some feedback on how we can change and improve the spreadsheet so that it's easy to navigate and understand. And I think Patrick had some ideas or thoughts.
Well, I do have some thoughts, I guess. So let me share my screen. I think if I just take over, right? It takes over. Does that work?
We'll find out.
Are you looking at an Excel file?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So the original, well, I don't want to say original. One of the versions that I received, I'll be candid, it drove me a little crazy. There may have been purposes for what it was doing, but it had a tab for every agency, including agencies. Most of the agencies were not involved in that particular request. Now, there may be good reasons for that, which I'd love to hear feedback on. From my perspective, because we're the hub, I look at every agency's data, not just the data from DOL for any particular request. I want to see what's going on because Liam, who works for me, is going to be responsible for all of the data coming in from every agency. So when I was clicking through the tabs, most of them were not agencies that had anything to do with that particular data request, and it just drove me to distraction. So, I mean, maybe that's on me. And I'd be happy to hear that actually that really was the best way to do it. So Scott and Katie decided to come up with Plan B, which was this spreadsheet here, which I had a hard time just figuring out what was going on because everything was blank. So Scott very nicely and helpfully put together an example of what it might look like once it was filled in. And so once he did that, I've looked at this, and now, of course, I have a bunch more questions, which I will now ask. But you may not answer them during this meeting. We will have a discussion at some other point. So, so this is all very nice. I did play around a little bit with like width of columns and that kind of thing. I think there's a bunch of tweaking that really could happen in terms of making this a more useful Excel file, which I started to do a little bit just to sort of play around with. Like this kind of column is just where you have the same thing over and over and over again, and it's a very long term. I'm not really sure Excel is the right tool for this kind of information. So just that you're expecting the requester to put all that information into one little Excel field. I'm not sure, but that's just a little feedback on that piece. And this was actually very helpful, where we're explaining how it relates to the research question. Although not every row was filled in. Again, are we expecting the requester to fill this in? The data type and format. I guess if it's the requester that's providing data, they're going to tell, and then now I'm sort of asking more than telling. If it's the requester that's providing the data, they're going to tell us the type and format that they're giving us. That these were blank, it left me a little bit, still not quite sure who's responsible for filling those in and what those answers might look like. And similar, I just am very curious about what what less than all would mean in terms of column F, how that would be filled in if all was not the what they were looking for. Just an example of what that might look like. I just couldn't think of any off the top of my head in the very brief amount of time I spent looking at this. So I do like it all being on one page. I do like the fact that only the agencies that are involved in a particular data request are listed, as opposed to every agency that participates in P20 Win. I am very thrilled, as you know, I'm a very big advocate for P20 Win, and I'm thrilled that we have so many agencies. But then when there's a document that lists all agencies, particularly a document with regard to a particular data request that in this case only involves 2 agencies, to have all the agencies in the P20 Win listed, I just find that, for my purposes at least, very difficult to use. So this is certainly a big step forward, at least in terms of making my life a little easier. Not that it's all about me, but it is a little bit about me because I need to be able to do my job. So any rate, I think I've talked enough. I'd be happy to unshare my screen, or if it's helpful for me to keep it up, I will do that. So I'll turn that to Katie. You can
So
let me
you
know
can
what the
keep
next
it up
step is. I'll keep it up.
yes.
Okay.
So one, we can definitely limit the agencies to the specific data request moving forward. That's definitely an easy solution. I don't have answers to the other questions you had, but maybe folks have thoughts or comments about what makes the most sense and how it's worked in the past.
Hi, it's Jan. Sure, I appreciate the feedback on this. As the initial designer and editor of all versions from beginning till now, I understand the document, and I understand it's maybe not the best that it could be. So this is also something I think might be ripe for the Data Steward Committee to take up and tackle as a topic. I mean, the intent of the spreadsheet is to give the agencies, well, to be clear about what's needed, right, from the data requester standpoint, so they document what they need. And so, for example, with that code set, sometimes it's all, sometimes it's not. Like if you're looking just for certain years or terms, or like with CSCU, it might be just community colleges versus all of our institutions, or it might be if we're looking at dual enrollment, you might actually put in the specific attributes that one would need to actually pull the data. So it's sort of dual fold. It's one to show what the requester is asking for, and also to give enough information so the agency providing the data can actually pull exactly what's needed. And so in some instances, things don't need to be filled in, like the column H could be, it's more, I think, well, when we began, it was very important to us, and in terms of, actually, this is a data privacy principle, it's a general principle of good practice anyway, of only asking for what you need, right? So you put your questions were on another tab. What are the key questions you're trying to answer? And then you needed to tie each element to the questions you're answering in some sort of a way. So one could just use a numbering scheme. You could have a tab that just has the questions 1 through 5, and then you could put numbers in there, and then that would be much simpler and wouldn't have, be so much space. So there's other ways to kind of do that. Anyway, there's a lot that could be said. I'm willing to join a team to kind of, I'm on the data steward committee anyway for now, to look at this in more detail. And I can answer specific questions about anything now. I just don't know if that's how you want to use this meeting's time.
Well, it's a great idea to bring it to the data stewards, so we can have that on the agenda for our next meeting. And then based on the feedback we get from there, unless there are folks here who want to be on a small work group to go over this, we can start with the data stewards. And we can, okay. So we'll bring it to the data stewards, and then we'll bring it back to the data governing board and see if anybody wants to be part of a smaller group. Okay. Thank you. That was very helpful. All right. So Scott, do you want to share the slides again? Okay. So for the data request calendar, if you want to go to the next slide, these are the requests that we have received are in progress, or various stages of progress. Many of them are in the review process. So not much of an update on many of them. The pre-K outcomes request, the data sharing agreement has been signed. We're in the process of setting up data transmittal from New Haven Public Schools to Labor and SDE. The West Ed manufacturing data request is in the process of being revised, and we are reviewing the HMIS DOL data requests. And we've had 2 UConn requests that are also in different stages of review. And again, some of these will require feedback and changes to the data sharing agreements first before we can really undertake them. So for next year, if you want to go to the next slide, these are and I just kind of guessed about where these annual requests would be submitted. So these are the annual and quarterly requests that we got starting this calendar year that we anticipate repeating next year, and when we expect that we'll need to execute upon these. So if you are aware of any ongoing annual, quarterly requests, please let me know so that I can plug them in. It'll help us navigate the individual data requests as they are submitted, just because we are seeing an increase in submissions at this point.
I think that the data for data request 15, maybe actually that might have expired. I don't know. There may not be any more years on that. If there
I think that did, but I can double check.
Yeah, if there are, I think a February date was the date for delivery to DOL. And I wonder if we could look at the time for the annual, the one in April, it would be 28, because we supplied data in June and it didn't actually get matched for quite some time. So I just think we should have a realistic timeline for when that's really needed, because it's a big chunk of work.
Right. So do you think that do you want to move it later in the year, or?
Yeah, and maybe this is a discussion with DOL at some point around their timing and what's realistic. And this year I think is tricky because there's the new report, the new templates are much more complicated, or they're changes that complicate what they've done in the past from what they've done in the past, which will require more time to prepare. So I totally get that. The next year should hopefully be easier. But I just think we didn't supply the data until June or July this year, so April just seems really early to me.
Okay. So we can definitely move that later in the year. I just, based on when I based this calendar on when the requests were initially submitted. Sure. So yeah. I can definitely adjust them based on when it was like approved and the data moved, and hopefully that'll be a more realistic and a reasonable approach.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm going to click the next slide. Unless you tell me not to.
Nope, go for it.
All right. And we have a guest we can introduce. Well, I'll talk because I'm unmuted. So we anticipate a data request coming in, Office of Workforce Strategy, and we have Niall Demondo from the office here to maybe give a little more background, and I can motivate it. This is a section of the implementer bill that went through, so it will soon be part of state statute. Last year, that I think as folks may recall, there were a couple of repeat reporting requirements that were occasionally fulfilled, although not sort of directed to P20 Win. Filled through P20 Win, but not sort of directed to us. And P20 Win wasn't named in the statute. So in the changes in the implementer last year, a couple of those were repealed, and then this request, which is similar, I think, in intent and purpose, was added in, and really to be directed to P20 and to recognize that that is the sort of backbone that's been fulfilling and producing a lot of the data on performance and outcomes for state workforce systems. So we have a somewhat impending deadline, and Niall, I don't know if you're ready, I can yield the floor if you want to give any more background for it, but this is when we anticipate coming in, and we thought it would be good to just get this on folks' radar before too much more time passes.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I don't know that I have too much more to add other than.
Also, do you want to introduce yourself, or not everybody know? I realize not
yes,
everybody
definitely.
Knows,
yes. Yeah, good to meet all of you. I think I know some of you, but not all. But my name's Niall Demondo. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Office of Workforce Strategy, which hopefully most people know who we are by this point. But for those of you who don't, we are the newly kind of established workforce development office in state government. And one of the kind of focus areas of our team is on data and the kind of performance of our workforce system. And this section of the implementer was drafted with, I think, the intent to better understand the performance of the different workforce development programs across Connecticut. So, WIOA, our adult ed programs, our community college and 4-year programs, kind of the full gamut. And I think our office really would like to use this request to just, I think, better understand, and then, based on the data, just come to a kind of collective set of goals for analyzing the performance, how to address performance gaps, how to build on and expand, high performing programs. So this is mainly just a kind of something that we have struggled to gather up to this point. And I know, we're a small team. We don't have a lot of capacity, so we have not made the ask yet of a lot of these programs for their outcomes data. So we felt like this statute just kind of lit a fire underneath us more than anyone else to get our act together in terms of kind of reaching out to agencies and seeing if they would be supportive. And I did. This is very recent. Scott was nice enough to kind of remind me that this is coming down the pike, and if you're going to put something in, it needs to be done soon. But I think we have some flexibility on that January date in terms of not technically having to get in a fully baked request. But I had discussed with Scott. He brought up a really good idea, which was maybe even submitting a kind of letter of intent almost. Like, we are intending to move forward on this, but we still have to have some conversations with certain agencies to make sure that they're aligned. DOL, SDE, CSCU, for example. So anyway, this is more of just a FYI. I did reach out to, given that this is kind of the chief workforce officer in consultation with the labor commissioner, I did reach out to DOL last night and just kind of, confirming their support. And then, we can get this letter in, and I will be reaching out to SDE, CSCU, and maybe a few other agencies. We will be, likely pulling together a letter just for the P20 team to indicate that we will be moving forward with this, but likely fleshing out some more of the details before a formal request is submitted early next year. So I'm happy to take any questions or provide more info on how we're intending to use this data, even though, quite honestly, I think it's sort of up in the air at this point, and we want to work with the agencies to define how we're going to use the data. But I think our team at least is very excited about this particular section, because we know this is really important information and something that we just haven't, our team just hasn't wrapped our head around yet. So anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we're coming up at the end of the meeting, but I will be sure to work with Scott to relay updates to this group as we continue to kind of flesh this out with some of the commissioners initially, and then moving down the line.
I don't know. I don't know who at DOI you've talked to. I'm sure you talked to the commissioner's office and maybe Lori. One thing I would say as I look at this statute is that if you make the January deadline for the letter of intent, and that's considered to be the request, that August 15th date doesn't move. And so I do have a concern about that, and would gently suggest that maybe the January 1st deadline be missed and you submit a request in January, and that's before January 1st, 2023. And we can get things done. But if you're really confident that somewhere early in 2022, you're going to get everything all in terms of exactly what you want so that we can meet the August 15th deadline, that's fine. And I would just also observe that, we're still coming off of the claims nightmare in terms of, on our agency. So like we already talked about, I think Jan mentioned some dates that just hadn't quite worked out this year. Well, that's partly because so much of our staff has been doing all claims all the time. And we also are going through modernization of our UI system, which is going to impact our ability to, that's not going to impact our ability. The way that we're accessing this data is going to be completely different after July 1st, 2022, as it is today. And that August 15th date comes so close to that transition that I'm a little nervous about it. So I'll just be,
Yeah.
So if you have a fully formed request this week, well, obviously we can get going on it right away and we can get it done early in 2022. If you're going to spend the first part of 2022 figuring out what you're really requesting, I would gently suggest maybe we try to miss that just January 1st deadline and think about what we're working on for the next January 1st deadline. So that we don't have that August 15th date coming in right at the moment that we're still learning our new system. So that's
Right.
just
No, makes sense, Patrick. And just to be clear, I'm not really wedded to the August 15th date. Like I want to make sure that we have the right request in, we have the right support from the participating agencies, and then based on available capacity, we collectively align on a date that works for our teams. This statute was put together in haste. I was actually one of the people who wrote this section, so I am not tied to August 15th at all. I totally understand the additional kind of pressures on some of the agencies who would be participating in this. So totally in alignment with you on that.
Jan has her hand raised.
Thank you. Another thing to consider is to leverage work that's in play now. So in terms of looking at the community colleges, both credit and non-credit, as well as UConn, and I think not the independents maybe this year. I don't know where they are with their data set, so maybe Mark can explain that. Anyway, we have a data request that will provide an enormous amount of employment and wage information for all of our programs, like in the pipeline right now. And so while that doesn't link to adult ed or necessarily link to WIOA, it's a massive chunk that could be worked with, and maybe an initial request could sort of do some patchwork, and then the next year could be bigger. Is it something to consider?
No, makes sense, Jim. And definitely, like, that's, I think, the conversations that we want to have up front, just because I definitely don't want to duplicate any work that's already being done by virtue of this request, and definitely want to make sure we leverage what's out there. That'll only, I think, help everyone in this case. So makes a ton of sense. And I think those are some of the conversations we can have, in advance of drafting the letter or shortly after submitting the letter, just to really flesh out what's available for this.
Any other feedback on this? Okay. Thanks, Niall.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, so I will let Scott talk about this.
Yeah, this is a quick thank you and update. Oh, we had the SLDS survey on here too, which I forgot about. And then I'll just give a quick update. So we completed the SLDS survey, and thank you to the many people who helped get that done in a timely fashion. So we completed the annual reporting requirement to USDOE for what the system does. I will also thank the 4 representatives that agreed to participate in the Eastern States Longitudinal Data Collaborative, which is being, I think, shepherded through our peers in New Jersey, and they are looking to build collaboration across the Eastern Seaboard from kind of Virginia up into New England, and are also looking for sort of like a backbone organization to kind of help it so that they're not perpetually in the need to do so. But thank you to Rob Bongelati from DOL, Ajit from CSDE, Jan for representing the entirety of higher ed, and Eric Bruner, who's in the Department of Public Policy, for serving as at UConn, for serving as a kind of like academic research partner. And so those 4 individuals agreed to participate in the governance process for this group that I think at least New Jersey is really putting a lot of energy behind, and I think is a good way to build interstate collaboration along with the purpose below. The other update I'll give, and I can send something out after this. So as I think some folks also know, The College Initiative mounted a data challenge where they're offering grants to different entities that want to work on some sort of use of generally higher ed workforce data. We submitted a letter of support for their letter of intent, for the letter of intent for New Jersey's proposal. So the New Jersey, their SLDS submitted a proposal along the same lines, looking at interstate collaboration on the Eastern Seaboard to get some support for those efforts and to really look at the post-secondary outcomes across state lines. So we submitted a letter of support for their letter of intent. Their proposal did get selected to move forward. It was asked to be revised substantially. So I will send the letter of intent that they submitted so everyone can see that, but just know that it is likely to change substantially in the next couple of months. So New Jersey is leading it. I believe the other states were Virginia, Maryland, DC, out of state, us, Rhode Island, and maybe one other that I'm missing in there. So they have a pretty good, chunk of the Eastern Seaboard that's participating and signed on to the initiative. There's no obligation to participate in anything other than the governance process that we've already signed up to. And if New Jersey's awarded funds for this, it would support some of the work that folks are doing in Connecticut. So I'll send the letter of intent afterwards. There's not much for us to do at this point because New Jersey is kind of in the lead and they're going to determine how they want to revise the proposal based on feedback from college. But just so you know, that's something that I think is hopefully like a nice way to build interstate collaboration. And we're grateful to New Jersey for leading the charge on it. Really, now we're at time, but if there's anything, I'll stop presenting. That's the last slide, right? Next step's adjournment. Yeah. So I'll stop the presenting, but if there's questions, suggestions on it, let me know. And thank you again to Rob, Jan, Ajit, and Eric Werner.
Okay, cool. So I sent everybody calendar invites for both the data governing board meetings and the learning sessions for next year. So hopefully you've all seen them. Our next meeting is January 7th, which is just a couple weeks away. I will follow up with everybody with a draft incident response plan, among other things. And unless anybody has anything to add or comment on, have wonderful holidays. I'm sure I will talk to all of you very soon anyway.
See you in the new year.
Too.
Have a great
Thank you.
holiday, everyone. Take care.
Have a
Great weekend.
great
Bye-bye.
holidays.
Thanks.